What I wanted to do today was look at the rejection of the Messiah. A couple weeks ago, we kind of paused for a minute and looked at a little more clearly what the Jews were expecting. Um, they were expecting the Messiah to come and set up his kingdom. And we also looked at the fact that kingdom was offered by Jesus. And what I want to do today is look some at the rejection of that offer and look at, how did people view Jesus? Did they consider him to be the Messiah they were expecting, or was there some disagreement about that? And so we'll just look at some of the examples we can see in the Gospels. We'll look at some of them. Um, and we'll look at the triumphal entry as well, and we'll finish up with that today. Let's start by looking at the reaction of some of those who were uh, following Jesus and uh, believed that he was the Messiah. We can start over in John chapter 1, and here we have uh, some of the some of the 12 being collected, um, and we can see their reaction uh, to Christ. In John 1, we'll pick up verse 40. It says, "One of the two which heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first finds his own brother Simon and says to him, 'We have found the Messiah,' which is being interpreted the Christ." And John just mentions here um, what he does here when it says we have found the Messiah, which is being interpreted the Christ. He just transliterates the Hebrew word Mashiach into Greek, and so just says Messiah and Christ, um, referring to the same thing. And a lot of times we can go to other Gospels and see um, people asking, and we will see, for example, saying, "Is Jesus really the Christ?" And as Jews before his death and resurrection, really the question they're asking is he the Messiah? Um, and so we see the reaction here. Andrew telling his brother, "We found the Messiah." And so here's an example of somebody obviously who believes that Jesus is the Messiah, believes they've um, found the one promised to them. And we can also see, if we scan down in this chapter, we can see Nathanael under the fig tree. In verse 45, it says, "Philip finds Nathanael and says to him, 'We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph.' And Nathanael said to him, 'Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?' And Philip said to him, 'Come and see.' And Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and said of him, 'Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile.' And Nathanael said to him, 'Whence do you know me?' And Jesus answered and said to him, 'Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you.' And here's Nathanael's response in verse 49. He answered and said to him, 'Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel.'" And so that's his response. We can also turn over to Matthew 16. Um, And here's another example from Peter. And we also kind of get, and we'll look at this a little bit more um, later, but we also kind of get that there's some, from just the general public, there's some confusion and debate about who he is. If we pick up in Matthew 16:13, it says, when Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, well, some say you are John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And so you can see here there's a number of options, different prophets. Um, but in verse 15, Jesus said to them, but who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so again, here what he's saying is he is the Messiah, the anointed one. He also says he's the Son of the living God. And so um, in agreement with his deity. And so again, this is the answer he receives from one of his disciples. Um, and let's also look over at John 11 and see what Martha has to say. Um, uh, and of course, we think a lot about the 12 disciples, uh, but Jesus had a lot more followers than just 12. During his time, there were uh, many others who were following him at different times. So if we look at John 11, um, let's pick up verse 25. Jesus is speaking to Martha here. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. And so again, you get this statement about him being the Christ or the Messiah, the Son of God. And so this was his followers. This is what they believed. Now, obviously, this is what you're supposed to believe at that time, because this is the truth. This is who he is. Um, but what we're going to see is that there's some increasing confusion or disbelief about his true identity. And this is going to lead people ultimately, the nation as a whole, to reject the offer that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, reject him as the Messiah, the King. And so let's take a look at uh, some of the things that we can see here. Um, let's look over at John chapter 7, and we'll touch on a few different places in this chapter as an example of what we're looking at here. Now we're moving away from Christ's followers and his disciples, and we're moving towards more of the general public, which would be Jews living there in the land at the time. If we look over at let's just pick up verse 12 of John 7. Actually, let's pick up verse 10. It says in verse 10, but when his brethren were gone up, then he, and that's just referring to his brothers, his actual family, then he also went up unto the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. And just for the sake of clarity, note what John tends to do in his gospel um, is refer to the religious leaders of the Jews as the Jews. And you can see this here in verse 11. It says, then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, where is he? And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him, for some said, he is a good man. Others said, no, he deceives the people. Howbeit no man spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. And so that's the shorthand that John uses to refer to the religious leadership, the Jews versus the people in verse 12. And what we want here is what we can see in verse 12, that there's disagreement among the people. Some say he's a good man and some say he's deceiving the people. Notice uh, this doesn't actually mention people who believe he's the Messiah. It just says some say he's a good man, which is not the same thing as believing that he's the Messiah, the coming king. A little bit of a safer conclusion, I guess, than going all the way with him being the Messiah. Now, if we move on down in the chapter and Jesus is speaking, um, and then we get his reaction to what, or the people's reaction to what he says down in verse 25. It says, then said some of those of Jerusalem, isn't this he whom they seek to kill? And again, referring to the leaders, the religious leaders, isn't this the one they seek to kill? But lo, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing to him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is the very Christ? Howbeit we know where this man is from, but when Christ comes, no man knows from whence he is. And so again, some doubt, some confusion. They're coming up with reasons why he's not the Messiah, and yet they're thinking it kind of are leaders acting like they know this is the Messiah. Um, and we also can pick up down in verse 31, it says, and many of the people believed on him and said, when Christ comes, will he do more miracles than these which this man has done? And so there were members of the general public who believed. And, kind of, we can see an example of their reasoning here in 731, where they say, when is the Messiah going to do uh, more signs than Jesus has done? I mean, is he going to do more? And so it does say there were that many believed. And um, let's also look at another reaction down in verse 40. Jesus has spoken again, and it says in verse 40, many of the people, therefore, when they heard this saying, said, of a truth, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ, which is the Messiah. So now, both these groups seem to believe he's from God, but there's some confusion. Remember, we saw um, back in the Torah a prophecy concerning the prophet. That's what the Jews are referring to as that particular prophecy. Um, And so some are saying, well, this is that guy, and others are saying this is the Messiah. And so now, even though these two groups have some agreement that he's from God, there's some disagreement as to which prophecy he's fulfilling. In contrast, in verse 41, it says, but some said, will Christ come out of Galilee? Has not the scripture said that Christ comes out of the seed of David and out of the town of Bethlehem, where David was? And so obviously they're completely unaware that he was born in Bethlehem, and they're saying he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. So can he be the Messiah if he's not fulfilling that prophecy? And so in verse 43, it says, so there was a division among the people because of him. And some of them would have taken him, but no man laid hands on him. Then came the officers to the chief priests and Pharisees, and they said to him, why have you not brought him? Why have you not brought Jesus? They sent these uh, officers, way back earlier in the chapter, to go grab him, and they returned without him. And in verse 46, the officers answered, never man spoke like this man. The Pharisees answered them, are you also deceived? Have any of the rulers or of the Pharisees believed on him? But this people who do not know the law are cursed. Nicodemus said to them, the one who came to Jesus by night, being one of them, does our law judge any man before it hears him and knows what he does? And they answered and said to him, are you also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee arises no prophet. And every man went unto his own house. And so we can see um, just an example of some of the reactions here in John 7 that people were having. Um, some believed he was the Messiah, some believed he was a prophet, some didn't believe he was from God at all, some believed he's deceiving the people. And then we have the response from the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and they respond with, as a group anyway, a little more animosity. And we can see, in spite of what they said in verse 48, that there were some of the leaders who believed on him. Um, we can actually pick that up in 1242, where it does confirm that. Um, John 12:42 says, nevertheless, among the chief rulers also many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. And we'll see that again later. So there were some, but they didn't openly, they didn't openly, publicly say they believed in him. Um, it was a secret because they were afraid of the Pharisees. And so we can see that as a whole, that group did not believe. Now, uh, let's take a look at, let's start actually looking at some prophecy. Let's look over at Psalm 69. And I want to pick up a couple of places in the Old Testament where it talks about some of this rejection. There's a few places we could go, but we'll look at a couple of places. Let's pick up verse 4. Well, let's just pick up from the beginning of Psalm 69. It says, "Save me, O God, for the waters are coming unto my soul. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I am come into deep waters where the floods overflow me. I am weary of my crying. My throat is dried. My eyes fail while I wait for my God. They hate me without a cause. Or those who hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head. Those who would destroy me, being my enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away." And so they hate me without a cause, it says. Um, let's also look over at Isaiah 49. Isaiah 49, 7 is what we want. 49:7 says, "Thus says the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to him whom man despises, to him whom the nation abhors, to a servant of rulers, kings will see and arise, princes also will worship, because of the Lord that is faithful, and the Holy One of Israel, and he will choose you." And so there's a couple of Old Testament references uh, dealing with some rejection. They hate me without a cause. Uh, if we turn over to John chapter 15, um, go back to the Gospel of John here. And Jesus speaking to his disciples, um, let's pick up verse 22. And he says, "If I had not come and spoken to them," and so he's been speaking to the disciples that they will be persecuted, the world will hate them. And so he says, "If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have had sin, but now they have no cloak for their sin. He who hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which no other man did, they would not have sinned, but now they have both seen and hated, both me and my Father." But this, in order that it might be fulfilled, the word that is written in their law, "They hated me without a cause," or just gratuitously, they hated me freely. And so, um, no good reason to do so, and yet they did. And we can see some of that predicted. Um, just a couple of examples. Let's look over at John 9, and I just want to point out something that caused them to something that caused them to stumble a little bit over in John chapter 9. And so we're dealing with uh, a blind man who has had his sight restored, and the Pharisees are um, trying to figure out who did this. They probably have some idea, but um, they're still on their campaign to um, discredit Jesus. And uh, this again is interesting. This always fascinates me, this sort of thing, which we see multiple times in the Gospels. John 9:15 says, "Then again, the Pharisees asked him," the formerly blind man, how he had received his sight. And he said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore, said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God. Now, uh, they've just heard that this Jesus caused somebody, performed a miracle. Why are they saying, why is their immediate reaction, this man is not of God? Well, it says because he does not keep the Sabbath day. This happens multiple times in the Gospels. You see the Pharisees' reaction is, well, he just did a miracle on the Sabbath day. That's terrible. And missing the point. Others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles, do such signs? And there was a division among them. Then they said to the blind man again, What do you say of him that has opened your eyes? And he said, He is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? And his parents answered them and said, Well, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we don't know, or who has opened his eyes, we don't know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself. And his parents spoke these words because they feared the Jews. For the Jews, and again, John's referring to uh, the religious leaders in general, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was the Christ, that he was Messiah, he would be put out of the synagogue. So at this point already, the penalty among these guys for claiming that Jesus is the Messiah is basically excommunication. They would put you out of the synagogue. And so, but we can see that some people, their immediate reaction uh, to hearing this great news about somebody being healed of his blindness is uh, that this Jesus can't be from God since he's doing this on the Sabbath day. Um, and we can actually look over at Romans 9, chapter 9, verse 32. We'll pick up verse 31 of Romans 9. Paul says, But Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, has not attained to the law of righteousness. Why? Because they did not seek it out of faith, but as it were out of works of the law. For they stumbled at that stumbling stone, as it is written. Here's another prophecy Paul refers to. As it is written, Behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and rock of offense, and whoever believes on him will not be ashamed. And so these guys, staring at the law, uh, whenever they noticed uh, that Jesus did something on the Sabbath or was off in some way, that was what caught their attention, and it was a stumbling stone to them. Uh, Now, let's see. Couple things. There's a couple more things I want to point out here. One thing we can see from Scripture, I want to make sure I have time to hit the triumphal entry. But another thing we can see from Scripture is we can actually see some of the reaction from his own uh, family. And if we turn back over to Psalm 69 and look at a different part of Psalm 69, uh, we can see this prophecy as well. Um, Let's read verses 7 and 8. It says, because for your sake I have borne reproach, shame has covered my face. I have become a stranger unto my brethren, and an alien unto my mother's children. Stranger to my brothers and an alien to my mother's children. So if we look over, let's head back to John, and let's look at we'll look at three different places that kind of deal with this. Um, let's look at John 1:11. And of course, John chapter 1, he's introducing um, his gospel with a statement beginning in verse 1 about the Son of God. Um, let's pick up verse 10. Yeah, it says he was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world knew him not. He came to his own things, and his own people did not receive him. And so that it says in verse 11, his own uh, people did not receive him. Um, we can just see there's some Greek grammar there. We go from his own being neuter in the first part of the verse, and then the second one is masculine, and so we go from his own things to his own people. His own people did not receive him. And let's get more specific and look at a couple of examples. John chapter 7. Um, John chapter 7 and verse 3. Well, we want to pick up verse 1. And we'll read these first four verses. This is interesting. It says, after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. And so different provinces uh, he's staying up in the north, away from Jerusalem. Now, the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand, and that would be down in Jerusalem. And his brothers therefore said to him, depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you do. For there is no man that does anything in secret, and he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Well, don't they know the Jews are seeking to kill him up in verse 1? I mean, don't they know this is dangerous? Well, it says in verse 5, for neither did his brothers believe in him. And so um, they don't believe in him. It says here, we can also see Mark 3, 21. Um, let's get a little context. Let me read like 13 through 15. Uh, in Mark 3, it says, and he goes up unto a mountain and calls unto him whom he would, and they came to him. And he ordained 12 that they should be with him, and that he might send them forth to preach and to have power to heal sicknesses and to cast out demons. And then it lists them. And down in verse 20, it says, and the multitude came together again so that they could not so much as eat food. They could not eat bread, I should say. And when his friends heard of it, they went out to lay hold on him, Jesus, for they said, he is beside himself. So that's their reaction. He's nuts. Um, and so his own people don't really believe. His brothers don't believe. Um, and so we see that reaction from people who knew him, uh, from his child, grew up with him. Um, and so quite a range of, do people believe in him? Do people not believe in him? And all this is to try to answer the question of, okay, here's the offer of the kingdom that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. Um, what is the response to that? Because we obviously can clearly see that what's prophesied to Israel about the kingdom that they can look forward to has not come to pass. And so, um, what happened to that offer? It was rejected. And so, what we want to do here is we want to now look at the what's called the triumphal entry. And this is also something that there's some prophecy about. And so, let's look over at Zechariah chapter 9. And we want to look at this event because this event kind of culminates um, some of this right before his crucifixion. Zechariah 9, and what we want is verse 9. We're in the middle of a context dealing with Tyre and the enemies of Israel. Uh, I'll just pick up a couple verses. Verse 7 says, "And I will take away his blood out of his mouth, and his abominations from between his teeth. But he that remains, even he, shall be for our God, and he will be as a governor in Judah, and Ekron as a Jebusite. And I will encamp mine house, or about mine house, because of the army, because of him that passes by, and because of him that returns, and no oppressor will pass through them any more, for now I have seen with my eyes. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes unto you. He is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. And I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he will speak peace unto the heathen, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, and from the river even to the ends of the earth. And so we see this prophecy regarding a donkey that's just dropped right in the middle um, of speaking about what is happening to Israel's enemies. He says he will come to you riding upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now, we're going to see this fulfilled, of course, in the Gospels. We can let's look at Matthew 21. I'm going to look at a couple places so that we get the full picture. We get the benefit of having different Gospels give some different details. Matthew 21, we're going to look a little more at how the colt was acquired. Um, So Matthew 21, verse 1 says, "And when they drew near to Jerusalem and were come to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, Go into the village over against you, and immediately you will find an ass tied and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, you will say, The Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them. And all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, Tell you, the daughter of Zion, behold, your king comes to you, um, meek and sitting upon an ass or a donkey, and the colt, the foal of a donkey. And the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded them, and brought the ass and the colt, and put on them their clothes, and set him on thereon. And a very great multitude spread their garments in the way. Others cut down branches from the trees and strewed them in the way. And the multitudes that went before and those that followed cried, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. And when he was come into Jerusalem, all the city was moved, saying, Who is this? So they seem unaware of who this is. And look at this response in verse 11. It says, And the multitude said, This is Jesus, the Messiah. No, that's not what they say, that Jesus the King. No, they say, This is Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. And so, well, now let's compare this to John 12. We'll get some overlap. And get a little more of this reaction. And John will put this a little more plainly as far as what exactly their reaction was. Let's pick up verse 12. And there'll be some overlap here, but then we'll move into further into the chapter. Verse 12 of John 12 says, On the next day, many people that were come to the feast, when they heard Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel that comes in the name of the Lord. So, do these people believe he's the king? That's what they call him. And so we have some people who come out to meet him as they recognize their king is coming. And Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king comes, sitting on a donkey's colt. These things his disciples did not understand at first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him, and that they had done these things to him. And so let's move forward in the chapter. Let's move down to verse 32, and we'll get some more information about the people's reaction. Verse 32 says, And I, Jesus is speaking here, and he says, And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to me. This he said, signifying what death he should die. The people answered him, We have heard out of the law that Christ, the Messiah, abides forever. And how do you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? And then Jesus said to them, Yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walks in darkness does not know where he is going. While you have light, believe in the light, that you may be the children of light. These things spoke Jesus, and departed, and hid himself from them. But though he had done so many miracles, so many signs before them, yet they did not believe in him, that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spoke, Lord, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe, because Isaiah said again, He has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. These things said Isaiah when he saw his glory, and spoke of him. Nevertheless, among the chief rulers also many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. And so we see here towards the end of his ministry on earth as he arrives in Jerusalem, and there are some people who go out to meet him as the king. But the ultimate reaction of the people there is they did not believe on him. And we saw some examples in John 7 of kind of the confusion and the differing opinions that people have. Some believed, some did not. We can see among the chief rulers in verse 42, there were some that believed, but most did not among those. Um, and they certainly didn't, publicly attest to it because they were worried about what would happen to them. Rather, they would love the praise of men more than the praise of God. And so this event is what's referred to as the triumphal entry. It was prophesied. Um, the mode of transportation was prophesied, and described what animal he would be sitting on, which is a ridiculous detail from Zechariah. We're gonna, in a couple weeks, look at his betrayal and get more ridiculous details from Zechariah regarding his betrayal. But it's called the triumphal entry, and it's interesting. It's an interesting name. It's not ultimately triumphant, in the sense that the people there ultimately didn't believe as a whole. And so, what do we see about the kingdom being offered? We see this offer really is not accepted because of unbelief. There's too much, there's some people who believed, but there was ultimately too much unbelief. They did not believe he was the Messiah, the coming king. Now, and this is especially true of the religious leaders. And so in a couple weeks, we will look at what the religious leaders planned. They were trying to kill Jesus for quite a while. And we'll also look at his betrayal, um, and some other things maybe leading up to his death. Um, and so we'll start moving towards Christ's crucifixion in a couple weeks. And again, details, we're going to see more details from Zechariah and other places as well.